You will have seen reports after reports here on this channel about the problems with service delivery and how many people are not able to get the services they need. So then, how do we improve the cities we have? What makes a city a good place to live in for its residents? Stephanie Chetti is the Director for Urban Policy Development and Management at the National Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. Stephanie, good afternoon to you. I suppose it helps maybe to start with a definition of what makes a city a good place to live in. I would imagine it starts with having services that actually work. Is that the right place to start?
Absolutely correct, and good afternoon, Stephen. Yes, it's about creating a space that's livable and inclusive for all, and including all of society, including your government, academia, civil society, having access to service provision, housing opportunities, job opportunities, etc., and creating an environment that's safe and livable at the same time.
So, I mean, there are huge issues. If you look at our cities, almost all of them, it doesn't matter how old they are, they're defined by apartheid spatial development. Do you see any determined efforts by our cities to try and change that? I mean, you would think there would be changes, but you don't really see major changes.
Absolutely. I think, firstly, South Africa has developed a national policy framework called the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is a policy initiative by national government and initiated by the Department of Cooperative Governance. And the IUDF seeks to foster shared understanding across government and society on how best to manage urbanization and address spatial transformation caused by apartheid regime, and look at goals of economic development, job creation, and improved living conditions. So I must say that since the era of apartheid, there has been some change, but not the most that you would like to see. But as national government, we are advancing in terms of the Integrated Urban Development Framework through the City Support Program, that is through your metropolitan areas, your intermediate cities, which is your secondary cities, and your smaller towns. So we're looking at addressing all inclusive across urban and rural initiatives.
I mean, one of the things it looks like we are really, and people in managing cities are just playing catch-up. They're just dealing with situations on a day-by-day basis. They're not really planning for 30 or 40 years or 100 years from now. I mean, am I being unfair when I say that?
No, you're not. I think in terms of the vision that we have is a long-term vision for the country. See spatial transformation, but when you look at the way cities and towns are actually planned, it looks at short-term visions and goals through 5-year and medium-term strategic objectives. But I think when you look at some of the challenges experienced by cities, the way transformation takes place, by then they address some of those challenges. You see the more challenges coming about at the same time. But you have various policy imperatives that actually kickstart some of those initiatives through your IDPs, your spatial development frameworks, your precinct plans, and the recently introduced presidential project called the District Development Model, which everybody's looking at development through a one-plan process.
I mean, we have all of that, and I mean, what you say sounds sort of impressive and interesting. I don't know if people really understand what's actually going on, though. I mean, I don't know if, I don't know if I really know what that's going to do for the cities that my children will live in.
That is true. That is absolutely true. Like, what do you envision for the future of your cities? So through this initiative, we're actually embarking on the Urban Festival, and the Urban Festival is about rebuilding and looking at now the impacts currently by post or COVID, should we say, because we're still in COVID, and the impacts that it's having in terms of transformation, and how do we rebuild, especially then looking at the discouragements of the pandemic and what it has brought about to society, and how do we make it more inclusive, more resilient, and more accessible at the same time.
I mean, so many people spend so much money on transport. I mean, 40% of many people's salaries is going just on getting to and from work. That's one of the things that we have to change. Now, I mean, Joburg has the Rea Vaya bus service. There are other systems. Cape Town has something similar. Do those rapid transport systems make a big difference? I mean, particularly if they're cheap?
So in terms of like the Rea Vaya and the BRTs that's been established, even the Gautrain, if you look at it in the way it's done and designed, it's more for the exclusive. and not really included and integrated. So the approach is, how do we integrate the existing transport system so that it's accessible to all of society in your from your rural areas to your urban areas to your townships to your peripheral areas, and how do we integrate that and how do we make it accessible and affordable? I think there has been a bit of change in terms of bringing about the Ria Vaya or the bus rapid transit system, integrating it with the Gautrain. We've seen people connecting, we've seen lesser usages of cars, but we go back now to the emphasis of the pandemic of where we are, and we see that people now working mostly from home. But those that are still staying on the peripheral areas and in the outskirts, they still suffer the consequences of paying higher costs for public transport and getting to work and back.
One of the problems around a city is that you have a lot of people living there. I mean, that sounds a bit silly, but let me explain what I mean. Those people want different things. I mean, everyone wants a better life, but how you get there sometimes is very difficult. So does that mean that it's quite difficult to get some kind of agreement on how to get where you want to go? A city is actually, by its very nature, a very difficult thing to manage or a very difficult thing to govern. Do we maybe have that problem in our country more than perhaps in other countries because of perhaps the sort of racialized inequality factor which really defines our society? Does that make it harder for our cities to plan for the future?
I would think so, in a way that it does make it a bit more difficult because it doesn't have and allow for the integration and inclusion. But what we're doing in terms of national government, we have then created the IUDF, the Integrated Urban Development Framework, as a vision to create cities that are livable, safe, socially integrated, economically inclusive, and globally competitive, where residents actively live and participate both in your urban and rural life. And the vision for South African urban areas recognizes that the country has different types of cities and towns which have different roles and requirements, and we need to own the mandate of spatial transformation and work together with the whole of government and the whole of society to realize some of the outcomes of the IUDF on the ground, and inviting all of society into conversations such as the ones held through the Urban Fest will provide relatively low barriers of entry for wider groups in society to connect and engage on matters on urban development and ultimately become change agents. So as COPTA, through the Open IUDF initiative, we've provided local urban change makers and seed funding for projects for different scales and locations to transform some of the communities. It won't necessarily address all of the issues that we see in society, but it looks to make the small changes as we see now.
Do you believe our cities are going to get better? I mean, is there any reason to believe that our politicians are going to grapple properly with the problems that we face? I mean, it seems sometimes that politicians aren't really that interested despite everything they say.
Well, it's really based on the needs of each of the cities. The municipalities are working really closely with civil society, with communities. I think with the new local government election coming up as well, we'll start to see a transformation. We'll start to see more things done in society, in our cities, and especially around economic transformation, job creation, opportunities, and infrastructure investments, as well as looking as a sustainable, resilient economic infrastructure for our cities and towns.
Really do appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed. That is Stephanie Chetti, Director for Urban Policy Development and Management at the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. Well.